Okay? Again, these are models of innovation which I think will change the way we think about innovation, think about the nature of innovation. And again, in the future, I think these will be very, very important. Many of these models are enhanced by technology, but fundamentally it's about a different way of thinking about innovation. And these new models of innovation, collaborative models of innovation, all exist within a more general framework which represents a new way of thinking about business. In fact, think about new ways of thinking about organizations. I'll talk about commercial businesses, I'll talk about service, I'll talk about manufacturing, but this also applies, as you'll see in some of my examples, to public sector organizations, government organizations, etc. And it's a fundamental change. What are we doing? Okay? Okay.
Don't worry.
It's a fundamental change in the way that we think about how organizations interact with each other. Fundamental change in the nature of competition, and a fundamental change in the way that we think about strategy. So what I want to do is spend a little bit of time this morning first starting with this general picture, the new business ecosystem, and talk about some of these changes in the way organizations interact with each other, and then within that general framework, what I'll do is start focusing on innovation.
I'm just teaching you.
That's not it. That's not it. Oh, it is. Okay. Good. The fundamental idea is very simple. When we talk about the new business ecosystem, and by the way, the word ecosystem very carefully is derived from biology and ecology because there are a number of parallels between business ecosystems and biological ecosystems. And basically, when we look at organizations today, what we see is that organizations, businesses, are characterized by a massively interconnected network of firms, and more important, network of skills, network of capabilities, network of technologies, network of stakeholders, and network of consumers. And again, these are interconnected in a variety of ways. And what that means for management and thinking about business is that business these days is increasingly about the management and the influence of assets outside of the boundaries of the organization. Financial assets, human assets, and intellectual assets. It's about managing and influencing those assets which in fact exist outside of the firm. And let me give you a few examples. There are many, many examples that we could talk about, but just for the sake of time, I've picked two examples that I think give you a good sense of exactly what it is I'm talking about here. Okay, so you can't really see this well, but Li & Fung, how many people have heard of Li & Fung? No one. It's actually a reasonably good-sized company. It's a Hong Kong-based supplier of supply chain services, provider of supply chain services. And what Li & Fung does is it links large and medium-sized American and European retailers, such as Tesco, Limited, it could even be that Printemps is one of their clients. It links these retailers with a large number of manufacturers, manufacturers of clothing, manufacturers of toys, manufacturers of home goods in China, in the Philippines, in Indonesia. In fact, more than 8,000 manufacturers in 68 countries. It maintains relationships with these manufacturers in 68 countries, and depending on the specific needs of their customer, it will put together a network of these suppliers so that the retailer ends up getting exactly the goods they want with the right quality and the right price, etc. And in doing so, actually cuts the usual lead time in the industry down by a factor of 3, which, as you might know, in retailing is very important to get quick lead times. Li & Fung itself has 3,600 people, 3,600 employees, and yet they are actually working with a network of more than 1 million workers, none of whom are their employees. And this is an incredibly powerful model. Li and Fung has profit growth and sales growth of in excess of 20% every year for the last 20 years. I haven't seen the last year. I don't suspect they're going to be able to keep that up. But certainly for the last 20 years, 20% plus growth year to year. And return on investment of more than 30%. It's an incredibly profitable model because they provide value. Being able to manage this network, sitting in the middle as its hub, is incredibly valuable to the customers who sit on the retail side. Let me give you another example which is familiar to all of you. Okay, this is Microsoft's ecosystem. Okay, Microsoft, at last count, lists almost 40,000 partners that it works with. And these are in a variety of sectors. So these are independent software vendors, like Intuit and AutoCAD and a number of other software developers. This includes trainers, system integrators, so a wide variety, a huge network of companies, all who depend on Microsoft and on Microsoft's platforms and tools to be able to do what they do. Okay, Microsoft is not a small company, but when you think of just the software developers, they in fact provide a platform that allow more than 5 million software developers to make a living. And again, this is sort of what the network looks like. Okay? So I think you see, by way of these two examples, the way a firm can act as a hub in pulling together a network and, in fact, influencing a variety of activities that don't take place within its own boundaries. Okay. Let me just talk a little bit more about hubs, because the theory of ecosystems revolves around understanding what a hub is. And hubs exist in biological ecosystems as well as in business ecosystems. Okay. It turns out that when you look at these networks of firms, some network nodes are more connected to others than the vast majority. The vast majority are on the periphery, and there are some nodes in the network that are much more richly connected than others. And this is true whenever connecting takes time or costs money. And so if it takes time, for example, you need to be able to connect from one part of the network to another part of the network. And so being able to go through these hubs is very important. It's also true that the evolution of networks towards hubs happens when specialization is important. So different parts of the network with different skills and different capabilities can specialize, and then they can build on the hub's platforms, and so work together. A number of different specializations, a number of different sets of skills can work together to create products and services that add value. The second notion that's important is that hubs have a critical role in the network, despite the fact that they're actually small relative to the total volume of the network. In ecology or biology terms, the influence of a hub is far greater than its biomass, far greater than the volume or size of that hub organization. And more importantly, what happens when a hub is attacked or destroyed, or collapses, or is suddenly removed from a network, is that it affects the health of that entire ecosystem. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples. This is probably the most well-known example. Probably can't see it very well here, but this is the World Wide Web. And the colors that you're looking at there are basically different nodes, different sites, different websites on different servers in different regions. So each color is a different region. And you can see by looking at it that there are hubs. You know, it's clusters of nodes, and they enable the small nodes on the periphery at the ends of the trees to actually connect to the rest of the network. What's very interesting about this is this was not organized by anyone. The World Wide Web evolved, and yet it evolved in such a way that automatically these hubs were created. And with millions and millions of these sites, it's critical, if you're on your computer and you want to load a web page, okay, you need to be able to connect to the server that web page is on. Okay? If, in fact, there were no hubs in this network, it would take you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of jumps from one server to another, to another, to another, to another, before you'd actually be able to access that web page. Because of the existence of hubs here, it's been estimated that no more than on average 19 jumps are necessary for any node in this network to connect to any other node in this network. Okay? And so the reason you can actually load a website so quickly is because these hubs exist. Let me give you another example. And I thought I'd actually, since we're talking about the similarity between business ecosystems and biological ecosystems, I thought I'd actually use a biological ecosystem. Okay, and again, I wish you could see this better. I loaded all these great pictures. Okay. This is a simple ecosystem that exists in the waters in the Gulf of Alaska. So we're looking at the Northwest Pacific. And this ecosystem revolves around the hub, which is the sea otter, nutria de mer, I'm told. The sea otter feeds on sea urchins. And sea urchins actually have essentially no other natural predator. Sea urchins, on the other hand, feed on kelp, which are very long, tall, essentially trees of seaweed. And the seaweed, the kelp, actually attaches itself to the bottom of the ocean and then grows upward. And sea urchins, in fact, eat the roots of the kelp, thereby detaching the kelp from the bottom of the ocean, and the kelp then floats away and dies. The kelp is important because the kelp provides food, shelter, and breeding grounds for fish and shellfish. And of course, humans are a part of this ecosystem too, because the humans feed on the fish and the shellfish, and to some extent affect the sea otter in a negative way by damaging its environment. Okay, so we can think about this ecosystem, and basically the sea otter as the hub of this ecosystem keeps the ecosystem in balance, so that the urchin population is kept down, but at a reasonable level. The kelp is healthy, and the fish and the shellfish then have the shelter and the food and the breeding grounds that they need. Now, there are other species in this ecosystem, or at least in these waters. There is the killer whale, or the orca. There are sea lions. And typically the killer whale, the orca, feeds on sea lions because they need the fat of the sea lions to be able to exist. And normally that doesn't interact with the other ecosystem. Unfortunately, global warming comes into the picture. In the late 1970s, the waters off the Gulf of Alaska, the temperature of those waters increased by 2 degrees centigrade, which may not seem like little, but its effect on an ecosystem is huge. Within 10 years, throughout the 1980s, the sea lion population plummeted. Given that, the killer whales began to feed off the sea otter. Okay. Between 1990 and 2000, the sea otter population decreased by 70%. The sea urchin population increased by a factor of 8, to the extent that there might be 1,000 sea otters in a square meter of ocean floor. And the sea urchins then attacked the kelp, killing it. So that whereas in 1995 there were vast, healthy forests of kelp that were 20 feet deep and 20 feet high, by the year 2005, that kelp had almost entirely been destroyed. And with it, the habitat for the fish and the shellfish was destroyed, vastly decreasing their numbers. And the fishermen, the humans who depended for their living on those fish and those shellfish, were essentially shut down. Okay? I bring up this example to just illustrate how when a hub is destroyed, when a hub is attacked from outside, and the hub collapses, the entire ecosystem collapses. And that's exactly what happens with business organizations. We could make a long, long list of other hubs. Li and Fung, Walmart, Dell is its own hub. And there are technology hubs too. Taiwan Semiconductor is a Taiwanese manufacturer of semiconductors. All they do is manufacture, which requires huge capital intensity and huge scale. And they have many, many, many clients who are designers of semiconductors, but that don't manufacture their own semiconductors, but depend on the tools and the design tools and the manufacturing expertise of Taiwan Semiconductor to be able to do their job. Google and Yahoo provide examples of hubs also in the technology world. Let me talk just a minute about ecosystem strategies. This is important because the old notion, when I first studied strategy, strategy was one firm competing head-to-head with another firm. That's what it was all about. And strategy was defined in terms of that competition. That's not the way today's world is. Today's world is a network of firms that work together, competing with another network of firms that work together. And so we need to fundamentally rethink how, in an ecosystem world, we formulate strategy. And to be simplistic, let me give you examples of three kinds of strategies. The most important one is what we call a keystone strategy. Everybody, you know about keystones.
I do.
A keystone is the stone that's placed at the top of an arch, which doesn't have much pressure on it, but because of where it's placed and how the arch is built, keeps the entire arch from collapsing. A keystone strategy is one where the firm says, our strategy is about explicitly improving the overall health of the entire ecosystem. If the entire ecosystem does well, we will do well. If we do well, the entire ecosystem will do well. If the entire ecosystem does poorly, we will do poorly. So this notion, this very important concept of shared fate, we're all in this together. And unless we act explicitly with that aim in mind, we may be in trouble. And so a keystone is a hub that contributes to its ecosystem in three ways that improve the health of that ecosystem. If you want to think about how you would measure the health of an ecosystem, there are three measures here. How is its productivity? For biological ecosystems, productivity is the ability to turn raw materials and nutrients into living organisms. For businesses, it's the ability to turn raw materials, capital, human resources, ideas into products and services that have value. It secondly promotes robustness. Robustness is a measure of an ecosystem ability to survive when things change, when there are attacks from the outside. The sea otter ecosystem is quite fragile, as you saw. A robust ecosystem is an ecosystem that can survive attacks from the outside without damage to the ecosystem. And the way one builds robust ecosystems is essentially to create diversity. New ideas, new business models, new markets, new products, new services. And so what may very well happen as time goes on and technologies change and markets change is that certain parts of the ecosystem will die out, but other parts of the ecosystem will flourish. And so while individual members of the ecosystem may have trouble, the entire ecosystem survives and also flourishes. Okay? Again, like biological keystones, these organizations play a disproportionate role to their biomass, to their volume, to their size. Li and Fung, as I said before, with 3,600 people, orchestrates 1 million people. And the important concept here is the keystone health. If Microsoft disappeared tomorrow, there would be many millions of people that would be out of business. Keystone health is ecosystem health. And how does Microsoft do it? Microsoft has a very explicit strategy. And it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that it wants to make money. Of course it does. But what it creates is standard interfaces, technology components, and tools, such as standard applications programming interfaces, which you can think of as hooks to Windows. So if I'm a software developer, I don't have to recreate the functions of Windows. All I need to do is attach my software to one of those hooks. In other words, Microsoft has provided a platform. I can use my own special skills and capabilities to do my software development, and then I just attach it to the platform, knowing that the platform has all kinds of capabilities and functionality that I don't have to duplicate when I write my code. Second strategy, which is exactly the opposite of a keystone strategy, we can call the dominator strategy. And this is a strategy that says, I'm going into an ecosystem, and I will try to extract all the value I can, capture all the value I can. It struck me when I was writing this that much of the American financial sector over the past several years has followed a dominator strategy, capture rather than create value. In biology, these species are called weeds. What they do is they actually take over other species and then replace those other species, or the space where those other species exist in the ecosystem, by their own, by themselves. And so these species can eventually dominate overall biomass. I always wondered, do you think biologically humans would be called a weed? Interesting thought. This could be a successful business strategy in the short term, but what happens is, since you take all the diversity out of the ecosystem becomes fragile. And if there are serious changes in the technology or the market or the economy, given that essentially the entire biomass is taken over by one species, if that species is vulnerable to these changes, then the whole ecosystem and the dominator can die. Some commentators have argued that Yahoo was part of the reason for the first dot-com bubble. Because what Yahoo did is basically try to extract every dollar it could from its partners. And it may have led to the demise of some of them. They've rethought that strategy. The third strategy is a niche player strategy. So the vast majority of nodes in an ecosystem, the vast majority of organizations in an ecosystem are not hubs. They're niche players. They have a specialty, they have a skill, and they then connect through the hub to create value with all the other parts of the ecosystem. And so a niche player strategy basically says, we're a niche player, we will use what the platform that the hub offers and build onto that platform and create new products and services that add value. So that's the general picture of what I think is a very interesting and I think a very powerful way of looking at the new world we're in. It's always been true that there have been networks of firms, but given the sort of the way knowledge is now distributed and the existence of technology that makes it easy to communicate, I think increasingly we'll see more and more organizations explicitly think of themselves and manage themselves and deal in their relationships with their partners as an ecosystem. So let me see how innovation fits into this world. Because in fact, the new models of innovation that we're seeing are ones that have taken the ecosystem idea and applied it to thinking about how do we create new products and services. How do we do R&D? How do we solve critical problems that we need to solve to innovate? So let me start by giving you a traditional picture, a very simplistic traditional picture. The traditional way of doing R&D, or innovation, has sort of two components. There's, let's go ask our customers what they want. That's the first piece. Of course, the problem is customers often don't know what they want. I remember talking to people at Sony in the 1980s, and after they had introduced the first Walkman. And they said, we talked to customers. Our customers couldn't imagine a Walkman. So they didn't say what we'd like is we'd like a Walkman, or describe it, because that was so different than what they had before. It was up to us to combine technologies to be able to create that. And then the second picture is we have our R&D group. It's a very skilled group, And once we figure out what the customer wants, or once we've defined what the problem is, we then set our R&D people on it, and they innovate. We can figure it out by ourselves because we're good. We've been doing this for a long time. We understand these technologies. And so the R&D group is the exact locus of innovation for our firm. The problem is, what happens when you need to understand a very different technology? And that often happens to organizations without them knowing that it's happening. So let me give you two examples of very new strategies, very different strategies than these. And these are both public sector examples, but there are many, many, many commercial examples, both manufacturing and service. And these, in some sense, bear out Bill Joy's words. Bill Joy was the co-founder of Sun Microsystems. He said, no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. Bear remembering. So, two new examples of new innovation strategies. I wish you could see this picture better. You probably can't. This is Avi Kramer. And you can't see, he's sitting in a wheelchair, surrounded by friends and family. Avi Kramer was a student at the Harvard Business School in the MBA program in 2004. That was his first semester. He was diagnosed with a disease called ALS, which in the U.S. is often called the Lou Gehrig's disease. Lou Gehrig is a baseball player on the upper right. He was a huge baseball star who died of ALS in 1937. This was the actual discoverer of ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, was French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot. And for a long time, these were called maladies de Charcot. ALS is a usually fatal, in fact, always fatal, degenerative neuromuscular disease. It basically attacks cells in the brain and in the spinal cord that control motion. And within usually a small number of years, the patient goes from fully functional to being essentially unable to move. And once it starts attacking the heart and lungs, that's the end of it. We know nothing about ALS. Absolutely nothing. It affects several 100,000 people in the world, but not millions. So it's not high up on the list of drug companies' agendas. In 2005, after Avi was diagnosed with ALS, he organized a conference of neurologists, medical researchers, pharmaceutical scientists, and he set up a foundation called, eventually, Prize for Life, raised funds, and then he said, what are we going to do with the funds? You know, there are already people out there, neurologists, who are already studying this disease. There are some pharmaceutical firms that are studying this disease, but they haven't gotten anywhere. How do we apply funds in an entirely new way to do something completely different? And what he did by setting up Prize for Life is to offer cash prizes for solving important parts of the problem. And the ultimate goal was to come up with genetic markers that would allow drug scientists to come up with drugs that would attach to those proteins or those genetic markers to be able to cure ALS. But in the short term, they needed to learn more about it. So, for example, there was no known way to tell, to say anything about the progress of the disease. Was somebody getting worse? Was somebody getting worse faster? Was somebody stable? There was no way to see how the disease was progressing. And so what they did is they offered a $50,000 prize for anyone who would come up with a method for being able to measure the progress of the disease. And neurologists attacked it, medical researchers attacked it. There was this obscure dermatologist in Illinois, and he noticed this strange fact that ALS patients who were in hospital beds for long periods of time didn't get bed sores, like most people who are in bed for a long period of time. And he studied that and discovered a simple skin test that you could perform on ALS patients to be able to monitor the progress of the disease. And this shocked everyone, because everyone said, dermatologist? Who would have ever asked a dermatologist? You know, we've got the world's best neurologists working on this. A dermatologist? Here's another example. This is the Oil Spill Recovery Institute, which is tasked with the recovery of oil and the reduction of environmental damage in Alaskan waters. This organization was created after the wreck of the Exxon Valdez, which spilled an enormous amount of oil in the Gulf of Alaska, which led to disastrous environmental results. And in carrying out their task, they had a problem. They couldn't, in the cold, frozen Arctic waters, they couldn't figure out how to separate frozen oil from the water. And therefore, they couldn't figure out a way of how to actually clean the oil out of the water and be able to transport it away. They did the same thing. They said, we will offer $100,000 to anyone who can come up with a solution. And lo and behold, a chemist from the concrete industry said, that's easy. All you have to do is apply the same method that we use to keep cement liquid. It's a vibration technique that allows cement to stay liquid before it's poured and then hardens. Again, people said, who would have asked anybody for the cement industry? Okay, these are both examples of where it's knowledge from a source that you never suspected would be important. In fact, is critical to solving the problem and is critical to the innovation. By the way, Prize for Life has just offered $1 million prize for anyone who comes up with a genetic marker for ALS, which would be the first step in having pharmaceutical companies be able to work on a cure. So the question is, how did these two organizations get ideas from such far-flung, unexpected sources? And they did it through a global innovation marketplace called Innocentive.com. Innocentive is a company formed probably less than 10 years ago. And what they do is they take important challenges in commercial, governmental, and humanitarian organizations. They have many, many corporate clients, including well-known names like Procter & Gamble and IBM. And these people come to Innocentive with a problem that needs to be solved. These people, we call them the seekers. And they anonymously post the problems on the Innocentive.com website. And solvers, who come from all walks of life, submit their solutions in a bid to try to capture cash prizes. And these cash prizes range from $5,000 for relatively simple problems to $1 million for more complex problems, like the ALS marker problem. What Innocentive does is actually very important. They work with the seeker, the owner of the problem, to write up a problem statement which is specific enough and complete enough that people who don't actually know, may not actually know what the problem is, what the solution to the problem is meant for eventually, for them to be able to understand it. They then work with the seeker to evaluate the submitted solution. Sometimes the solution works, sometimes it doesn't. They match the seekers with the solvers, and they also protect intellectual property. Solvers have to sign an agreement saying that the intellectual property, especially in commercial situations, remains with the business firm that was the seeker. So this is a very new model, this notion of let's broadcast our innovation challenges to a wide audience and see what we get. Okay? Let me give you another kind of example. This seems like a silly example, but it's actually quite meaningful. Anyone here ever heard of Threadless.com? I guess it's a U.S. phenomenon at this point. Yeah, good. Did you ever buy a Threadless T-shirt? Right. Yeah, this has actually become very popular in the U.S. This is the designer T-shirt company. And so you can see, here's one of the T-shirts. You can't see the detail much. So let's go on. Here's another one, upside down and right side up, giraffes. Threadless.com is a customer-centric model of innovation. So what they do is members of the threadless community, and the community is artists, designers, and people from all walks of life, including Harvard Business School professors, submit T-shirt designs. Okay? The members then vote every week from 1 to 5, and Threadless then chooses 5 designs each week. And it's not necessarily the highest average score that works. Threadless actually prefers a T-shirt that has lots of 1s and lots of 5s. The winners receive $2,500 plus coupons for T-shirts. 2,500 T-shirts are printed in each of the designs and offered for sale at $15 to $20, which is a huge margin. They always sell out. They've never been known not to sell all 2,500 T-shirts. 800 designs are submitted each week. I mean, think about that. 800 designs, they select 5. Okay? So the leverage of this model to get the very best designs is huge. This is an enormously profitable company. $40 million turnover, more than 30% after-tax profit margin. Because they don't make the T-shirts. They don't design the T-shirts. The members of the community end up doing half their marketing because, of course, if you have a design that won, you write to all your friends saying, hey, one of my T-shirts won, please buy one. Enormously successful. So let's just try to generalize from these examples and see what can we say about innovation, the old models and the new models. And I will argue that there are 2 dimensions that are especially important. One is, where is the knowledge about how the product or service will be used? And then, where is the knowledge of the solution to the innovation challenges? And the knowledge can be concentrated within the firm. In other words, the firm may really know this is how my customers use the product. Or, in fact, it could be distributed. It could be all over the place. Similarly, the knowledge that you need to solve the innovation challenges can be concentrated within the R&D group of the firm, for example, or it can be distributed all over the world. And there are different innovation models for each of these, if you like, 4 conditions. So if the knowledge is concentrated and the use knowledge is concentrated, that's a perfect model for the internal R&D group. They understand the technologies that need to be applied to solve this problem, and they know how the product is used. If, on the other hand, they have the technologies and the knowledge to solve the innovation challenges, but the knowledge of how the product is used is distributed among the customer community, that's the time when you really need market feedback. And that becomes then the driver of their innovation strategy. What we're looking at is a new world where the solution knowledge is distributed. Where, in fact, the solution could come from anywhere. Dermatologist, cement industry, anywhere. And that's where we see the new models. So Incentive has what we call the innovation tournament. Okay? We take the product, we know the use of the product or service, but we don't know how to solve the innovation challenges. So what we'll do is we will send it out all over the world to anyone who wants to try to solve it and pay them for it. And then we will choose the solution. The threadless model is one that says the use knowledge is distributed in the community. It's the community that really can decide which of the T-shirt designs that would be popular. And the community also has the knowledge of how to design a T-shirt that would be popular for that market. Okay? So in fact, if we think about how designs are selected and managed, these designs are managed internally. These designs are invited from a much broader community. These designs are selected. It's the firm or the organization that actually selects which designs it chooses. These designs are elected. It's the customer community or the community at large that actually says, this is the best of the product. This is the best t-shirt. This is the product that will serve our needs. And so what's interesting about this little chart, which tries to generalize those examples, is with far more widely distributed knowledge and greater access to the tools of innovation, what's happening is this area, which was always the dominant place to be, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's my opinion that the future is all about these things. When more and more organizations are going to see the power of being able to broadcast problems and innovation challenges to a broader community, to specialties that one would never suspect would be able to bring to bear the solutions and the innovations that are necessary, people will understand how important this is. My time is short, so let me skip lessons. Let me just talk about this for a bit, because I've been very upbeat. I've been very positive and very optimistic. But as we look at organizations, we see that most organizations still cling to the old world. And this is one of the most surprising charts I've ever seen. This is a study done of retailers, U.S. retailers, and all of their suppliers. And what it's about is how much information do you share? Okay. Inventory data. Less than 40% share information with their partners. Sales forecasts. Less than 40% share information with their partners. It's interesting, if you're forecasting 10,000 units and I'm forecasting 5,000 units, it's not surprising that we're not going to, we'll either stock out as a network or we'll have vast excess. Point of sale data. We hear all about how point of sale data is so valuable. Point of sale data is shared only about 25% of the time. And look at this one, promotional plans. Now this is the highest, more than 50%. But shouldn't it be 100%? If I'm running a promotion and I don't tell my retailer that I'm running a promotion, how can they plan for it? And how can my promotion be effective? So we still need continued changes in mindset to move from this old world of I do everything internally, I keep all my own information, and I keep the boundaries firm, to a new world which is best characterized by a friend and colleague of mine, Joe Badaracco, in his book, The Knowledge Link, How Firms Compete Through Strategic Alliances. And this is very eloquent what he says. The twin principles, the two principles, that one, organizations have boundaries, and two, that these should be kept sharp, are basic assumptions in much of our traditional thinking about management. They are also ideas whose time has passed. They are also ideas whose time has passed. So hopefully that gives you some food for thought, and thank you.